Well, hello and welcome to another episode of the New Ground Life and Leadership Podcast, where we seek to help you thrive as a follower of Jesus wherever you are and in whatever you're going through. Today, I'm really excited to be joined by the one and only Kieran Dunne, who is Associate Pastor at the King's Church Mid Sussex and also an evangelist, whatever that means, we'll discover together. And Kieran, for the past few years, has been teaching on the Impact training program, equipping the students there to think about evangelism and sharing the good news of Jesus with other people. He's a real encourager and always a joy to talk to, and someone who's incredibly funny. So I'm really looking forward to having this conversation. Kieran, welcome.
Jez, thank you. That's the best intro I've had. My advice is, if you're listening to this, I'd turn off now.
That's as good as it gets.
It's going to go downhill from here, I feel. But Jez, lovely to see you as ever. Thank you for inviting me to come and talk to you.
It's great. And I know that you've got a lot of just practical, helpful encouragements that are going to benefit so many people as we talk about.
I hope so.
The subject of today we're going to be cracking open is the subject of evangelism, sharing the good news of Jesus with others, and particularly touching on how we do that in a time of pandemic and global crisis like this. But Kieran, let's kick things off by teasing out your profound, insightful things that you've learned either about yourself or leadership in the past 6 months.
So, okay, guys, if you're listening to this, Jez emailed me this question. This was going to be the first question. And I couldn't come up with a decent answer. I was trying to think of something that would really help people. Do you know, actually, no, I do have a decent answer in all seriousness. It's quite simple. And I think probably the thing that I've just been reminded of fresh is that God hasn't changed. I know for the folks listening, Jez, they know that. And that's why I'm saying it's, in some ways it's not that profound, but it's the most profound thing that's impacted me, that through all the highs and lows of this season, all the joys and the pain actually of seeing what people are going through and some of the things I've experienced as well. I thought, you know what? God hasn't changed, and it's not a surprise to him what's happening. And I guess I would say this, but I'm just so excited as well. Having seen Jesus transform so many lives through this lockdown, that genuinely, I don't think it would have happened. Well, God's sovereign, but it's really through the pandemic that I've been able to sort of encounter people and see their lives change, predominantly through Alpha, actually. So.
Wow. So is that the main, I guess, kind of reason why you'd say God hasn't changed, because you've seen him continue to save people during this process, or is it something broader than that?
Yeah, I think it's a good question, Jez. It's personal, because through all my my insecurities and my saying, God, why on earth did you ask me to be a church leader? Surely there's got to be better people than this. All the kind of internal wrestles that I have, there's been that reassuring sense of, yeah, God, you're the same. You're faithful. You never let me down. Even when I don't feel you, you're nearby. All those kind of promises and truths. But then beyond that, it is because we've been running alphas online, and just watching people leap into the kingdom has been just a joy. So and very life-giving. And I'm really hoping that you might think, well, that's all very nice for you, Kieran, but we haven't seen that. But in some ways, I'm hoping that, I know when I hear inspiring things that are achievable for people, not things like, that are out there that I think, well, I could never do that. I'm hoping it will be inspirational.
And I think that's always something that I appreciate about you, that you are inspiring in the sense that you make people think, I could do that.
Thank you.
But it's interesting. You talk about, responses of people to Alpha, the Alpha course, a course that helps people explore the Christian faith and ask some of life's big questions, something that you've been involved with running, and you've been on the national team of Alpha. What's your part? What's your involvement with Alpha officially? What's your title? Do you have a title?
I don't know. Muppet.
We need to give you a title.
I think if you look it up, it'd be Kieran Dunne. He's known as the Muppet. So I used to work for Alpha International before I joined the fantastic team at the King's Church Mid Sussex. So no, I'm just a regular kind of guy who is appreciating all that the Alpha team have
Mm.
put out there. They've responded so amazingly quickly to the pandemic. They've Holy Trinity Brompton, which is the home of Alpha. I know some of you know this. I think they've been starting an Alpha course a week, 1 or 2 a week. They've had more people on Alpha than they've ever had before. So, and they're so generous. They give away all their resources for free, and it really is idiot-proof, as I can testify. So yeah, and happy to talk more about that or other stuff. I'm going down an Alpha alley here that may not be.
No, it's helpful to pick up because I've heard similarly from on a video I watched of Nikki Gumbel talking about the success or the response that they've seen at HTB for Alpha. Have you've seen similar? Have you locally? It seems from some of the things you're saying.
Yeah. So we were actually kind of coming towards the end of an in-person Alpha when the first lockdown happened, and I heard that there was this option to do Alpha on Zoom. Got to be honest, hadn't really used Zoom much before that.
No one had.
I put it out to our existing Alpha guests who wants to continue online, and none of them did, which wasn't a great start. Actually, one lady did. So we just kind of tentatively dipped our toes into the water with Zoom. I'm aware that lots of people through their jobs spend a lot of time on online conferencing, Zoom and other platforms, and the phrase Zoom fatigue is certainly, it's in our vocabulary now, isn't it? What's fascinating is that my observation is that even people that fall into that category professionally, who are on business meetings all day, they've said no, this is different. When we do Zoom on Alpha, it feels completely different, which is amazing. So we started off with one online Alpha Zoom. It was just bonkersly good. And at one point, I was running 3 Alphas a week on Zoom. And I just kind of praying, God, if somebody comes, we're going to start another one. I believe if I've got one, I'll just pray for another person. And counterintuitive, we'd normally, as a church, we'd run 3 Alphas a year, in sort of in a termly way. And normally you'd avoid summer holidays, that kind of thing. Well, we've been cracking on through the summer, and it's just been amazing. Can I keep going, or do you want me to stop?
That's helpful.
Just pressed a button.
No, I'm interested in you saying whatever you want to about that question, and
So
your observation of
I think
Alpha.
Observation I'd make, and I hope this is an encouragement. So look, if you had experience of running Alpha or no experience, there's brilliant resources that you can tap into that will help you get started. But so observation, none of the guests on these 4 or 5 Alphas we've done have ever physically been to our church to a service. They've all engaged with our online church services and have come and done Alpha as a result. The interesting thing is that I think nearly all of the guests, now I'm not talking hundreds of people, but all of the guests have said they wouldn't have done Alpha if it wasn't for the current pandemic. And they would only have done it because it's online. They wouldn't have turned up at our building or at another venue. They've only come because of that. So that's really interesting, isn't it?
That is really interesting.
What an opportunity that we've got.
Yeah.
Amazing.
And I think what the guys at Alpha have produced with the films, that series that you can watch, means that using Zoom, you can run Alpha with 2 or 3 people very naturally over Zoom now, which just makes it, an easy entry point for a friendship as well. A friendship, like you might have a friend that you like talking to about faith, and it's a very natural thing to say, hey, let's watch a video together over Zoom and then talk about what you think. And we've seen a couple of people doing that, which is really exciting. Alpha's a fantastic tool.
We've got the other sort of interesting, I think you're spot on. There seems to be people, because they're in their own homes, Jez, they're really relaxed. So there isn't that sort of tension. And I think also people think, do you know what, if I don't like it, I can just unplug the internet, I can just log off. There isn't that awkward, I'm in a building, I'm not sure quite ooh,
Mm.
whether I like it or not.
Mm.
So, um,
Kieran,
yeah,
let's stay with that a second. I want to just kind of get to know you a bit more and understand your journey with Alpha
sure.
and becoming a Christian in general. When did Alpha, or when did you get a sense that, well, people use this word evangelist? You
Yeah,
discovering a call to be an evangelist, and people have perhaps
yes.
different ideas about what that means. When did you first discover a sense of vocational call to be an evangelist, and
Yeah.
how did you come to appreciate Alpha?
Well, I became a Christian. I've worked for many years now as a church leader and evangelist, but I used to work in a secular workplace. I worked in the city and became a Christian whilst I worked there. I really think from early doors, Jez, I just had this desire um, to share with other people what Jesus has done in my life. And yeah, I wasn't, to be honest with you, I was pretty rubbish at it. I was just trying to articulate what had happened to me. But there was, the way I've described it sometimes, it was almost like, I think Jeremiah said, it's like a fire that's shut up in my bones. It's got to come out. And over the years, I've not only, I think, had that desire to, in my own way, just to share something of Jesus, but then also I think to try. I've had a heart to encourage people. Look, hey, you could do that as well. And I think that when we think about evangelists, one part of it is proclaiming. So I get the opportunity to speak at events and speak to
Mm.
non-Christians in a public setting. I've been often non-Christians say to me, "Hey, you're like a stand-up comic." They're not expecting. I think they're expecting somebody in the God Squad to be a little bit crusty or whatever. But so I do that kind of public thing. But then also part of the role of evangelist, it says in Ephesians, is that, to equip God's people to do that. It's not about one person doing it, but it's helping others to do it. And I think I've realized personally, I love to try and make Jesus known in my own faltering way. There's a public kind of bit that I do, but then there's also another bit of trying to equip and help others on the journey as well.
Mm.
And that's kind of grown over the years. Um, do you want me to answer the alphabet as well, or do you want
No,
to
no,
sort of
let's
come
go
back
with
on
that,
any of that?
because what I appreciated before you quoted from Ephesians, evangelist role is to equip people for roles. You use the word encourage, and I think that's something that anyone who spends time with you knows and sees. You're an encourager of people, and so tell us about the root of that. How did you, or why do you encourage people? Where does that come from? How do you cultivate something
Mm.
like that?
Well, I sometimes have these internal dialogues with God. Jez, you very kindly asked me to come and speak at your church. Typically, what would happen is I'll be there standing next to you during worship, and I'll be going to God, God, how did this happen? How on earth did I end up doing this? And yet having that sense in God's kindness, he's like, do you know what? This is good. So I'm very aware of, I wouldn't necessarily say that I'm a natural evangelist. Through some brilliant people and resources, I've learned some really helpful. So I suppose people have given me tools, Jez, that I thought, wow, that's really helped me. And therefore, I feel, what I've learned, I would love to kind of pass on. So I've said this on the impact training. Back in the day, because I've been at this for a while, we used to do like open air evangelism, we call it. Mike Springer, amazing evangelist, love him to pieces, used to coach us and train us, and we'd go out on the streets. Typically, probably sounds a bit archaic now, but typically a Christian with a guitar, rainbow straps, perhaps sandals with socks. We would go out on the streets, sing choruses and stuff, and try and share Jesus with people. Well, I was leading our church. This is a few years ago now, many years ago. I'm the evangelist on staff. Got a team of people about to go out. It's pouring with rain. Everybody's like crying out to God, God, please let the rain stop so we can go out. I'm praying, God, please let it keep raining. I just don't want to go. I'm being honest, because and the encouraging bit, I think, comes because I realise how not every form of evangelism is for everybody. And I've realised actually that, well, if I'm leading the jolly thing and I have a sense of reluctance sometimes, and yet it's combined with faith and believing God's going to reach people and save people, and there's always a battle in sharing our faith, so I'm aware of that as well. But I think, well, in some ways, I feel I can relate with the just most Christians who would say, well, I don't think evangelism is quite my thing. I don't feel necessarily confident or comfortable in it. So there's lots of people that are more competent and much more comfortable than me. And if that's you, fantastic. I want to learn from you if you're listening to this. But yeah, so I think if I can encourage people by saying, look, do you know what? I don't always find this easy, but hey, we can walk with God, and it's an adventure. So yeah,
That's really
does that
helpful.
make sense? I don't know if that is.
Yeah, it's really helpful. But I mean, you touched on the idea of different forms of evangelism, and
Yeah.
I think for so many people, when they hear the word evangelism, they instantly feel heavy, instantly feel burdened and guilty, and they think of salesmen trying to peddle a product, and we're all fed up with salesmen in a society like this. So, what are different forms of evangelism? How have you been set free from thinking evangelism must be this loud and proud proclamation, and it must include these points, and you must describe the fires of hell in great detail, or else you haven't properly done evangelism? That sounds very different from the sort of thing you're saying. So, how have you been set free from that way of thinking? And what would you say to people who are still kind of wrestling with that?
Wow, that's a great question, Jez. I think I've become happy in my own skin. And if you're listening to this today, Jesus just loves you. God loves you. Jez, God loves you. You're the person I'm actually in front of. Maybe it's just you. Maybe it's just you and me. There's no listeners. But, he just loves it. If you're listening to this, Christian today, you're God's favourite. He just thinks you're amazing. And I think the more I've realised that God really likes me the way I am, with all my quirks and foibles and weirdness. I am one of the weirdest people I've ever met. And become happy in my own skin. I've become more and more conscious. Do you know what? God is pleased to use me the way I am without me having to try and become like somebody else. Now that's really releasing because, and let's clarify. I've learned so much from other people. And, there's things that other people have done. I thought, wow, I think I could take that and adapt it and make it my own. But I think that's a really key thing, Jez, that just know that God loves you, and you can be happy in your own skin. And there's a whole thing about our identity and everything, which we probably haven't got time to go into now. But God really does think the world of you. And actually, you can have an adventure and have fun. So I've found, actually, interestingly, most of my evangelism it's been quite funny. And Jez, I've shared some of the stories with you. And I love laughter and I love fun. And I've realised that there's a hugely serious side to people's eternities, and I'm not playing that down. But I've also realised that people loved hanging around with Jesus, and sinners loved hanging around with Jesus. And I kind of feel like he must have been sort of, it wasn't just, do you know what I mean? There must have been something about him that was attractive. And I'm seeking, if I can, to make Jesus attractive through me.
That's good. I mean, we get the language of hell and the descriptors of hell that is often part of the intense gospel pitch that we hear in a lot of modern circles when we think about evangelism. We get that language from Jesus himself, and yet you're right. The type of people that chose to be around him, those weren't the kind of people necessarily that would have thrived and been drawn to really serious, intense, uptight, driven people. And Jesus certainly, for him to say, "Come to me, all you are heavy burdened," he doesn't say, "Because I will give you an intensity to your life that will crush the life out of you, and I will drive you into the ground until you have preached the gospel to as many people as you humanly can." And yet we've put that pressure on ourselves because sometimes out of a good heart, I desperately want to rescue people from the fires of hell. But sometimes out of a guilty place, my pastor tells me I must save people from the fires of hell. And I think I hear what you're saying, but what again strikes me about you is just an authenticity in being yourself. Have you always been like that? Have you always been someone who's kind of, I guess, tried to resist other people's attempts to put you in a particular box and mold and just embrace who you are? What's the journey that you've gone, I suppose, is my question, to appreciating and living in a comfort of your own skin?
Yeah, I think it has been a journey, Jez. I'm being honest. So I come from a slightly, a difficult family background, and some domestic violence growing up, and that really affected me. It affected, there's people listening that could say, yeah, that's my story. It made me insecure, and as a result, even when I became a church leader and was working for the church, I felt I needed to achieve in order to be accepted. And I was inspired by others, but then also I compare myself with other people. And either the conclusion would be I'm not as good as them. They've seen more people saved. They've got more people on their alpha courses. So I would feel, a sense of inferiority. Or flip side is I'd swing towards pride. And I'd think, wow, I'm doing well. I'm better than them. And I think by realizing just God's love and acceptance, and turning away from that's been one of the big changes. The other big change I think I've realized is that because so if that's true, if God is happy with me and you, Jez, if he thinks you're the best, which he does, you're simply the best, better than all the rest. Do you want me to sing it, actually?
No.
Tina Turner makes an entrance into the New Ground podcast for the first time. Because that's the kind of foundation. I've realised, if God has said that he's happy to, partner with us, we can be his ambassadors. Well, one of my favourite verses in the Bible is salvation belongs to our God in Revelation 7:10. Salvation belongs to our God. It doesn't belong to Kieran Dunne. What a relief that is. Or to Jez Field, or to insert your name here. It belongs to God. So that means that in spite of any shortcomings I might have, God's just happy to rescue people. And that takes the intensity out of it. There's an urgency, but the intensity comes out of it because it's not all down to my efforts.
I do hear that, and I find that as a relief and as something that does release some of that pressure. My mind immediately goes to salvation belongs to our God. Well, he still needs you and me, or requires, asks, say need. Wow, maybe I've revealed some Freudian subconscious belief there, but he doesn't need you and me. He still requires and requests and wants to partner with us in our activity. Definitely. And I live in that space. The description you gave of yourself pre-becoming secure is like, well, welcome to my skin, where I either have to live in a
journey. It's a journey, isn't it? You feel it still, yeah.
And it's an ongoing journey. I appreciate that, but equally, you look around and you think it does not seem a lot of the time as though the Lord is busily seeking and saving the lost in the way that I would like him to. On the one hand, I feel that, and then I meet other people, often outside the church, if I'm honest, and I see God at work in their life through the things that they're saying and thinking, oh, he is seeking and saving the lost. It's just
Yes.
not many of them are finding their way to the church. What's that about? What's going on there? What's some of your reflections on some of my own insecurities and wrestlings with those questions?
Yeah, join the club. So I have loved in the past reading about people like George Whitefield. Okay, one of my heroes. If you don't know about George Whitefield, he was a contemporary of the Wesley brothers in what's known as the Great Awakening in the 18th century. Probably, I would think probably one of the greatest evangelists of ever. Yeah, so inspired by those stories of massive crowds and multitudes turning to Jesus, and there's something in our hearts. As you know, Jez, I've got a life-size cardboard cutout of Billy Graham in my office, haven't I?
Yeah.
And the photos of him speaking in stadiums, a small kind of like speck with just multitudes. And I think that just resonates with me. And yet I'm aware, it does say, doesn't it, God, do it again in our day, one of the Psalms. And I'm just reminded of that verse where it talks about we're therefore Christ's ambassadors. And I think the phrase, again, I haven't got my Bible in front of me, it says, as if God were making his appeal through us. So there is that sense of God's sovereignty I believe in. Salvation belongs to our God. But there is that as if God was making his appeal through us. So I don't want to, God could, and I think will, we could move back to those days of mass crowds, and it's hard to imagine even in the COVID situation we're in. So this last week, I got a letter from Alpha Towers, Alpha HQ. I got a letter from them saying 300,000 people have done Alpha online since March.
Wow.
Well,
wow.
You just don't have to dip into church history too long to look at something like the Welsh Revival. I think it was 100,000 people turned to Christ. Well, conservative estimate, 300,000 people have done Alpha online. Let's say 10% of those people turn to Jesus. Now, I think it's more than that, even by the courses we've run.
Mm.
Let's say 10%. Well, that's 30,000.
Wow.
So, I don't know. I don't want to kind of rule out the thing that has been in my heart for years, actually. And yet at the same time, I'm just constantly thinking, God, you're just at work in a sort of underground way. So Tear Fund did some amazing, you probably know this, Jez, did some amazing research, like looking at different demographics, 18 to 24-year-olds. I think it was something like, you might know this, was it 50% of 18 to 24-year-olds had tried church online during the first lockdown?
No, I don't know that.
Forgive me if I've got that stat wrong, but if you Google it, you'll be able to find out the exact figures. And it's this kind of almost like hiddenness, because like you, I go out now on the streets and it seems like nobody seems to be interested. And yet you just scratch below the surface and you think, wow, God's just doing stuff.
Wow.
So is that helpful to you?
And you hear, a stat like that from Alpha HQ, and as you did really, could put it alongside the Welsh Revival. And we're talking staggering numbers of people who are being influenced and affected by the church in this country in a positive way, being drawn towards the gospel. And yet I also, as you were speaking, I was reflecting that I think part of the issue is our obsession with trying to make it about me and my patch, me and my church, rather than taking a broader perspective and thinking, wow, the field of God in this country or in the Western world is
the Jez field of God. Can we call it the Jez field of God?
No. My point is the opposite. Like Jez Field's field of God may be pretty barren, but the field of God and what God's actually doing is very fruitful and seeing a lot of harvest. And I've heard Pete Gregg talk on this before, and the way that he throws out stats and insights into what God's doing globally to help lift our heads, because you're right, we're so used to just walking out of our front door and thinking, oh, I can't see God at work. And it may be, we're not looking for the right things, but it may also be we're too focused on ourselves and our own little worlds and our own little lives, instead of lifting our head to realize, like you just did with that stat from Alpha, God is at work in a huge way in this country. And I think part of our challenge is like Jesus did at the pool of Siloam. My father is working until now, and I'm working. He's always looking to see what his father's doing. Is how we as Christians can see what God's doing, live with our eyes open to what God's doing in our vicinities, and cultivate meaningful relationships with people outside the church. So then get close enough to us as Christians to see or to smell the aroma of Christ.
Yes. You see, I want to take issue with you, Jez. Right? Here's a. I think you are more fruitful than you realise. And you fessed up and said, "Oh, the field of Jez is just so barren."
Maybe it's just self-pity.
Oh, there's a principle in the Bible that we all know about called sowing and reaping. And in Mark 4, it says that a farmer went out to sow seed. He sows the seed. It's an act of faith, actually. You know this parable. Sowing the seed, and then I love what Jesus actually says. It says, "Night and day, whether he sleeps or gets up, it's growing." Now, initially, we're not farmers, but you chuck a bit of grass seed out if you've got lucky enough to have a garden. You can go out. There's not much happening, but night and day, there's So there's more going on than we realise. Let me illustrate it. Okay, one of the online alphas that we've been running had a guest. Actually, she dialed in from Chester. Okay. The reason she dialed in from Chester is because that's where she's from, and her dad had died of COVID, and she was up there for the funeral. But she's a midwife. She works with a lady in our church who has been she's a lovely lady, Rachel. They work together, hospital in Surrey. Rachel isn't like preaching all the time. She's just being who she is. You said, we are the aroma of Christ. And anyway, this lovely lady, Lisa, she heard about Alpha. Rachel told her about that. She came online, and obviously it was a very difficult time for her. Long story short, Jesus has radically met with her. Her life has been transformed. She can't stop really telling people about. They say, "What has happened to you?" People say, tell me. Right the way through the journey of Alpha, she's sharing with her colleagues. Well, long story short, she's emailed me saying, "Hey, you wouldn't be able to help me to start an Alpha for midwives, would you, in the hospital?"
Wow.
She said, "I haven't advertised it yet, but I think there'd be some interest." Well, she emailed me yesterday saying, "Look, I haven't started asking people yet, but 7 people have said they want to do it."
Wow.
I haven't even given her the posters to put up in the staff room. So she's like, this is great, isn't it? She said, "Would you mind helping me?" Yeah. I don't mean, I would mind. I mean, I want to help, Or, another one of the alphas online, one of the guests there, lovely lady Karen, she was filled with the Holy Spirit whilst, she's a businesswoman. She was out work, driving, filled with the Holy Spirit. We watched the Holy Spirit talks, the Alpha Holy Spirit, and she said, "Oh, that's what it was then."
Wow.
Transformed. She's now joined, because she wasn't local either, she's now joined a New Frontiers church plant. They've never run Alpha Online. She's running it with them, for them. Brand new believer.
Wow.
Now, she came to know about this because a guy in our church, another business guy, worked with her. She employed him as consultant. The aroma of Christ. She said she didn't like him, didn't want him to join the company. They're now firm friends, her and her husband. So she did Alpha, and the next Alpha Online we did, her husband did it. And now they're both plugged into this church plant.
Wow.
Now, I'm just scratching the surface, Jez, of, I don't even know what the question was. I was thinking we were talking about the fruitfulness thing. There's a seed sowing. So both Steve, the guy who's a business guy, he's just living as a Christian in the workplace. Rachel, midwife, she's worked with this lady for years, just living as a Christian in the workplace. There's opportunity to talk about faith, just doing it in a very natural way. And you can see how just the adventure of walking with Jesus and the opportunities that can come. Oh, you pressed a button. Sorry, I'm going on.
That's so good. It's really helpful. And I think
You're fruitful,
it's a
Jez.
really helpful example really of how stories and being reminded of what God's doing around us lifts our head, because you're right, it makes you think, oh, God is at work, he can use me, he could use me, I will open my eyes again. And I think as Christians we probably live, between that dynamic of having our eyes wide open to what God might be doing, brimming with possibility, and then falling back into discouragement and despondency. And I think people like you are so vital for helping open people's eyes and go, see, he is at work all around you. Tell us some more stories, Kieran. Story time with Kieran.
Again, I'm just trying to think of what's helpful, because and just I want to reiterate, Jez, you can see me, other people can't. I've got a face for radio. Okay, if you don't, let's just put it that way. They didn't film me, and there's a reason for it.
Although you can watch this on YouTube.
Is that right? Oh, okay. Yeah, need prayer before doing that. Yeah, don't enter into that one lightly, is what I'd say. Yeah, so I'm just trying to think what's going to be helpful for people. You see, I mentioned, I think it can, walking with God can be an adventure. And if you are in that place where you think, do you know what, God, you know who I am, I'm shy, or I'm reluctant to speak, or, I find maybe, talking to people difficult, whatever it is, that doesn't exclude you from being on an adventure with Jesus. And he will open up opportunities, if you ask him, that are a perfect fit for you and are achievable for you. So I've kind of got a bit of a thing, and I've seen it happen so much, as we've talked a lot about this kind of stuff, where I just want to be friendly to people, because I think a great way of extending the kingdom of God is just to be friendly with people, not in order to somehow manipulate them into becoming a believer, but just because I think God loves people. I'm going to be friendly with people, and who knows where God might take that. So what do I mean by that? Well, we're getting some building work done in our house, and our neighbours, a couple of doors down, in fact, all the houses in our road are having building work done. So at the end house, there's nobody there, but the scaffolders putting up scaffolding. So I'm on the way back early one morning. I've been out, coming back. It's chucking it down with rain. Rare in Haywards Heath, but it was raining. And I see this guy like putting scaffolding up, and I'm thinking, God, he must be soaked and frozen. So I just said to him, I said, excuse me, mate, not a great day to be doing that. I said, look, I'm just going in the house. Do you want me to make you a brew, you and your mate, a cup of tea? He goes, oh, yeah, that'd be amazing. It's a bit rank out here. And I said, well, look, I'll do it in a COVID-sensitive way. I'll wash my hands and that, and I'll bring you out a cup. So I took out a couple of mugs of tea, and he came down. He goes, oh, thanks so much. Gave him the tea. I said, well, that's £2.50 then, please. No, that was a joke. Okay, so just to be clear, I didn't actually charge him. That was like a joke. It just wasn't funny. I said, that's £2.50, please. And he could tell that I was joking because, my face. And he just absolutely cracked up. And I just, and I just said, oh, how's it going? And, we were having a laugh, and he was saying about how, builders are complaining about what they've done, so they had to come back, and builders don't like scaffolders. And there's a whole conversation. Now, look, I've got to be honest with you. I didn't sort of say, well, I'm glad you're talking about building, because you need to build your life on the Lord. And with that, produced a Bible from my back pocket and showed him verses. Now, I've got to be honest. Actually, I didn't have a conversation with him about Jesus, but I think, I was good news to him. And the reason I start at that point is because if we can get into the habit of, when we go to the checkout, we can just say, hey, how's your day going, to the cashier? And that, you enter into conversation. And I've got into the habit of that. So, it takes a while to form a habit of showing an interest in other people. And you know what? There's value in that. Forget about sort of words now. There's just value in just showing love to people and being kind to people. But I found that when you do that, you can then start to say, God, give me courage to take another step in leading people towards you.
Mm.
Do you know what I mean, Jez, in that?
Mm.
I'm trying to make it really achievable,
Mm.
because maybe it'll take a few weeks of just, God, help me to start thinking about. So when you go into a shop, rather than being on your mobile phone talking to somebody, think, do you know what, I'm gonna just save that call, and I'm gonna be in the moment and talk to, the shop
Mm.
assistant.
I think it's really helpful, everything you're saying, and I can see that if we're wanting to know what the next step is in evangelism, often people do. They just picture the person on the stage, or they picture the sales pitch. But if you're not moving forward in the first place, the step forward is to start moving. And starting moving looks like, I think, as you helpfully said there, being interested in other people. God loves the people in front of you. So
Yeah,
we ought to cultivate a same interest in them. These are people made in the image and likeness of God, for whom Christ died. Something you've said before that I've written down as a quote here, so be careful. Something you've said before is, we need to be aware of the strength of the bridge that's being built between you and the person that you speak to. If your
yeah,
friendship is a 2-ton friendship, don't send over a gospel lorry of 10 tons. You say a bit
yes.
more about that.
Yeah, I think it's, yeah, so weirdly, I think, we talk about friendship evangelism, Jez, as, well, I don't do friendship evangelism, I do servant evangelism, or I don't do friendship evangelism, I do proclamation evangelism, or I do confrontational evangelism, or whatever. And yet, um, in 1 Corinthians 9, the Apostle Paul said, I've become like, Jews in order to win the Jews. I've become like non-Jews in order to win those that aren't Jews, those not having the law. In order to win those not having the law, I've become all things to all people, so that I may win some and see some saved. So I take from that who we are and how we relate with people is a bridge building thing. Now, this goes for any relationship. It's, I can't remember when it was, Jez. We I think actually it was one Christmas meal, wasn't it? We had our first kind of proper conversation, and you were showing an interest in me, and hopefully I showed an interest in you, and you're building that bridge. And sometimes that bridge construction can be really quick, and sometimes it can take a long time. And I'm aware that for some of the contacts I have, it maybe takes, it's a process. That seed sowing illustration Jesus used of night and day. Evangelism is often a process. So again, to sort of earth it, I mentioned we've got some builders in this whole lockdown phase. We had a sort of thing on the back of our house that was falling down, and they've been doing some amazing work. They're great guys. Now I'm aware they're going to be like in my house they've been there since the spring, on and off. And in my heart, I'm thinking I'd love them to see something in me and us that reflects Jesus, and I'd love to have a conversation with them, so that they, I can't remember how it came up now. They might have asked, what do you do? Often when people ask that, I say, well, I'm in the God Squad, and like, what, you're a vicar? And I say, yeah. Now, often what I'll do, I'll just stop there. It isn't like I think, right, I'm in. It's now the moment to proclaim the whole gospel message. No, because at that point, the 2-ton bridge that's there, maybe, a 500 kilo package is all that's needed. But it's interesting, as you look for those opportunities over these months, they've been asking me and quizzing. And, just the other day I was on one of these Zoom calls, and Adam, who's just the nicest builder, he said to me, he says, really pretty interesting watching because I'm working from home. He goes, "You're quite an executive, aren't you?" I like that. He said, "I imagine being a vicar would just be standing at front of church and sort of waiting for people to turn up to talk to." Now, he's making a comment on what I'm doing, but I've been able to just share some of the good news of Jesus and the impact it has on people's lives through some of the social action ministries that we're doing. And talking to him, and he's saying about, do you know what, my wife is interested in faith, but I'm not. And, and it's, it's this whole journey where there's little bits of gospel nuggets going across the bridge. And they've finished this kind of phase for the moment. So we won't see them for a few weeks, and they're outside. And I was saying, guys, thanks so much for all the brilliant work you've been doing. And, we're having banter and all the rest of it. And I said, we're so grateful. They said, listen, if there's anything, that isn't quite right, get back in touch and we can help you out. And I said, well, look, similarly, if you ever need anything, you know where to call. I said, look, if you're thinking I could really do with a Bible verse right now, give me a ring. And they just start cracking up and laughing. I'm serious. There's a joke to it, but actually there's a seriousness to it, because I've often found with those sorts of, I used to work in Glasgow fruit and veg market. I got it ripped out of me for being, a Christian. But actually, in the moment where one of the guys who gave me the hardest time is struggling with his son, he's taken me to one side and just saying, look, can I talk to you about this? And it's those... Yeah, I hope that makes sense.
I think it's helpful. I think, and always in my mind is the need to hold on to that verse from Revelation that you shared, that salvation belongs to God. Because I hear the wisdom in what you're saying. There's a part of me that probably an instinctive fear that's like, no, but there's an urgency. We've got to try to, crowbar in some gospel. But then I counterbalance that with, but unless people ask, like I'm giving them something they're not asking for or not looking for. But yet you are also very skillful in the way that you are prepared to share the gospel message in a timely way, even when people don't ask. Because my observation is people don't ask for advice generally, let alone about faith. It's very rare that someone would come up to you and say, is there anything I could do to parent my children better? Well, they don't do that. Is there anything about my life, the way I'm making decisions that isn't going quite my way, that you can give me some tips on? People don't do that. And yet, as Christians, we're going, I've got an answer that I really want to share with people, but no one's asking me any questions.
Nobody's asking. Oh, curses.
It's like the person with a solution going around looking for a problem.
Yeah. I think one of the things that I've learned from actually the Willow Creek guys, I've learned so much from them. So if you could look up, some of their resources on evangelism, absolutely brilliant. One of the things that they've said is mention spiritual stuff early. And because it's a springboard. So I will, you've heard some of my stories, Jez. I will try and so I might, in a throwaway comment, just say, oh, yeah, we were talking about that at church the other day. Or, people say, oh, what have you been doing? I said, I was just out on my bike. I'm a Christian, really praying about a situation. I said, look, just to be clear, I've got my eyes open. I don't pray with my eyes closed when I'm cycling. Something like that. Just try and keep it real. Yeah. So I'm like, I'm a Christian, I'm praying about something. Take the intensity out of it, but you're just dropping in. Do you know what? We could talk about this.
That's really good, and my observation has often been that until spirituality is on the table, it's very hard to actually build a meaningful relationship with someone, because it's such a large part of who you and I and Christians are. Unless it's something you can naturally talk about, you haven't actually got a friendship. You've got an acquaintanceship, or you've got a facade, or you've got a mask that you're having to wear. One of the things that will often come up, though, is the fear that people have in being asked awkward questions. And in the past, apologetics was, awkward about, can you prove the existence of God and things like that. Increasingly, but you Christians are bigots. You don't like X, Y, or Z, whatever the cultural, objection to Christianity is at the time. What would you say to help people? Because, so people don't bring up the fact they're a Christian because they're afraid they will think I'm this, or they might say that. And, what would your encouragement be to people who think those thoughts?
Yeah, a couple of things, Jez. I think fear is always linked with evangelism, because it's a spiritual battle. And I think there's always that slight nervousness, despite what I'm saying about trying to make it natural. So, there is a stepping out, which is a battle. I think you don't need to be aware of that all the time, but having that as a background, this is warfare is helpful. I think that interesting. When I've spent a lot of time in the past talking to people from cults about the gospel, and they've got all the answers and they're all sewn up. But we know a person, not a package. So I'm all about introducing people to a person, and his name is Jesus. And if you're listening to this and you think, I don't think I know enough, or I can't answer people's objections, that's fine, because you know Jesus. Now, there's ways to be equipped, and I would recommend people like the Ravi Zacharias International Ministries, Michael Ramsden, those guys. Unbelievable resources. They're online. A lot of them, the resources are free, and I encourage you to be equipped. Often, when people are asking those sorts of things, they're not going to say this, and I'm not even saying you should tackle it, but it's good to understand sometimes what's behind it is, their best friend was killed on a motorbike when they were 22 years old, and they've been saying, God, why did you let that happen? Or their person maybe have experienced some abuse at the hands of the church, or sometimes there's a reason that is unrelated to even what they're arguing against. And through relationships, sometimes that comes out. So even sometimes when you've got the answers, so it's not about winning an argument. Sometimes when you've got the answers and you're proving, it's almost not what people want to hear, which is weird, because there's people who genuinely want to know answers, but sometimes it's discerning between some of that thing and not actually being afraid to say, do you know what, I've no idea. I don't know. But I know there's resources, people have looked into it. You might want to consider the Alpha course. That's a kind of introduction to this kind of thing, or let me come back to you.
That's really helpful.
Sorry, there isn't a kind of one size fits all answer with that, Jez, because it really depends on the individual, if you know what I mean.
I think your comment there about meeting members of cults and realizing they've got all the answers sewn up is really quite interesting, because we offset that with our gospel isn't a gospel of we've got everything sewn up in life. We can make sense of absolutely every problem out there. We know it all. No one wants to be friends with a know-it-all for a start, but that isn't the gospel. The gospel is Christ has conquered the death, has conquered the grave. Therefore, the thing that you fear most of all, he's taken the sting out of that. You can follow him and trust him. That's the gospel message, is that he's Lord of the world, not, these opinions are right. And often we fall into that trap of thinking, if I can convince them of this moral view, I'll make them a Christian. But I love what you said there. I think it's Ravi Zacharias who says he sought to answer the questioner, not just the question.
That's
so you're
brilliant.
recognizing the person who's bringing the objection or the question. And that's ultimately, people want you to engage with them, not just their questions. That's really helpful.
And I think just by loving people, people that they hate God because... So somebody's got objections. I'm like, do you know what? That sounds really painful. I'm really happy to talk about that, and I don't have the answer. Just listening and caring about people's pain and their hatred of God, rather than getting defensive, can be a great thing to do, and a loving thing to do.
Really helpful. Kieran, we're covering a lot of ground here. It's really helpful. Is there anything else that's in your mind at the moment that you'd love to say to encourage someone?
God, that's putting me on the spot. No,
fine.
I don't know. Well, I think just nothing that I haven't really said before, really, Jez. That
Here's the final question then that we'll kind of love to get your comment on. How do you help people break through crippling fear?
Just generally, or to do with evangelism, you mean?
Uh, let,
Yeah,
let's say generally, because I don't think it's necessarily so distinct from evangelism. But I'd be interested
okay,
to hear
yeah,
is that tips
yeah,
into the
sure.
other one.
Well, I don't know if you know this, Jez, but I'm actually quite an anxious person. Um, and yeah, I've had fears of heights, spiders, and on the list goes. Um, so I feel I can speak from a little sort of my own kind of experience. Um, you and I know, and if you've been a Christian a little while, you might have heard the verse that says that God's perfect love casts out fear. And for me, it's the verses where Paul says, don't be anxious about anything, but with prayer and petition, present your request to God. And it says, and something remarkable will happen. And the peace of God that goes beyond our understanding will guard our hearts and minds in Christ Jesus. So, that sense of saying, God, I'm really anxious about it. So our neighbours, we've got a sort of adjoining roof thing going on. They've got builders in. We're trying to work. Sarah, my wife, said to me, this is Saturday morning, we need to talk to the builders because they want to do some things. I'm not sure that's the right thing. Well, immediately, because I'm not particularly competent in that sort of thing, there's like a wave of anxiety that comes into me, if I'm honest, Jez. And I just had to pause and stop and say, do you know what? Actually, I do believe that God, I'm presenting this to you. Um, I'm believing that your peace can go
Mm,
beyond my understanding and my lack of ability to handle some of these things.
mm,
But I think the key thing, and even in that passage that we often quote and we see it on, Bible verse stickers and all sorts, is the verse before says this: "The Lord is near." And I've realised that actually God's near me, and He's really interested in those moments of anxiety and fear, and I've simply found by saying, God, you know how I feel, and being honest, I feel really, I've got to be honest, Jez. I said this to my guys on my team. Administration makes me anxious. I'm not that good. I can do it, but and I think it's just being honest and acknowledging, God, you know me, and you know that this isn't easy for me. And the same then when it applies to evangelism. How much time we got? I was going to tell a story, but I don't know if I should.
yeah, keep going.
Um, a number of it was a few years ago now. I was working for Alpha International, and I was on my way to a business meeting. I was talking to a guy who owns a massive chain of hotels, McDonald Hotels, and he's a Christian, and he wanted all his staff to be invited to an Alpha course in each one of his hotels, which is a remarkable opportunity. And I was involved in that project. And I was on the way to a meeting. I was on the train, and on this train, I looked over and I saw at the time a very famous TV celebrity. Probably not so famous now, but there was a couple that used to do a house makeover program called Colin and Justin. Do you remember them? No,
Sorry.
exactly. Anyway, two Scottish guys in same-sex relationship. Lovely. It seemed like lovely blokes. Well, one of these guys was on the train, and I looked over and I saw him, and I just kind of felt that little kind of prompt inside, which was, you need to go and talk to him. And I'm like, oh, crikey. I'm like, are you serious, God? And anyway, I thought, right, I got up to get off the train because it was my stop. It's a place called Polmont. Nobody ever gets off there, but that's where the hotel was. Getting off at Polmont. He gets up. I'm thinking, okay, God, I'm taking this as a sign. So he came to the door and I just sort of smiled. I didn't want to do that horrible kind of like, oh no, you're famous, aren't you? You've been on television. It must be so annoying if you're famous. So I just smiled, said hi. We're getting off the train. I said, God, nobody gets off at Polmont, do they? And he goes, no, it's like the back of beyond. I said, I know. I said, what are you doing? He goes, well, I'm going to look at a car. I said, oh, that's interesting. What are you buying a car? So anyway, he's talking about the car he's going to buy. And I just wanted to chat. So we're chatting about the car and stuff like that. He said, what about you? Well, I said, well, I'm going to a meeting. I'm actually meeting this businessman, explained what it was. And we're talking about something called the Alpha course. You heard of it? I explained what Alpha was a little bit. I said, look, and I had a little Alpha business card, a little Alpha advert that, you could give out to people. And I said, look, you might want to look at it at some point, and gave him the card. And he goes, oh, thanks very much. So it was really nice to chat, and moved on. It was just a normal conversation. Okay. But I needed to conquer my fear. Lots of people listening to this would be really prophetic, Jez, and they'd have moments where they said, I feel God said this, I feel God said that. And, and that's brilliant. I've got to be honest. I know God speaks to me through the Bible. The way I sometimes feel is just a little nudge from God. Very, very rare that I feel almost like some audible message come to me, or not audible, inaudible message. And I don't think I've ever said this publicly. But as I walked away from that, it was like God whispered into my heart. He said, I knew you'd do that. Kind of a well done. And he said, I knew I could rely on you to do that. Honestly, it makes me want to weep, because I hear God so rarely. He said, I knew you'd do that. I knew I could send you. And please, I'm not trying to big myself up, mate. The funny thing is that I was flying down actually to something that J. John said. So I was flying from Glasgow Airport with a good friend of mine, Nick Cox, who was a professional rugby player, played for in the Premier League, and then played for a Scottish club. But he was also training as a Anglican or Episcopal minister. So we were flying down together. We're sitting at Glasgow Airport, and we're waiting for our flight. Sorry, no, Heathrow Airport. We're waiting for our flight. And I said to him about meeting this TV celebrity guy. I said, I told him the story. I didn't tell him the bit I just said, but I told him, I'm never going to guess who I met on the train. So I told him the story. He goes, that's really weird. Because myself and my wife, we were invited to X Factor Live, and we were on the front row. And who was sitting next to us but Colin and Justin? So there's my mate who became a Christian on Alpha. Like, he was just like a godless rugby player, became a believer. He's now actually a Baptist minister in Scotland. He's sitting next to this couple. They're asking about their lives. He's just got this opportunity maybe to take over that bridge, just a little nugget. I'm going, no way. Well, we stand up, Jez, because I prayed for this guy. I prayed for him. We stood up to get on the plane. Who's standing in front of us but Colin and Justin?
Wow.
Now, come on. This isn't about me. It's not about my mate Nick. It's about this amazing Saviour we have, Jesus, who just loves to save people. And there was another time. Okay, I'm coming out of work, Alpha's offices in Scotland. I cycle. I was on my bike. I was at traffic lights in Bath Street in Glasgow. Giant Range Rover pulls up next to me. The window goes down, and it's this guy. So I'm worried. I think he's stalking me. To end that story, somebody said to me, there's an amazing Church of Scotland church in Scotland. People there love Jesus and know Jesus. Somebody said to me, do you know what? His mum is a faithful Christian and loves Jesus. Now, I don't know, Jez, but something tells me that his mum's praying big prayers for him. Because any mum would, wouldn't they? And then I'm on a train, and you just feel that nudge. And sorry, that's a long way to end. You probably wanted a shorter thing. But what I'd say, if you're listening to this today, do you know what? You could be the answer to somebody's prayers. And I've found time and time again, in my fearful, stumbling way, I've been the answer to people's prayers. Some I've known about and some I haven't. So,
wow. Kieran, that's beautiful. And also it's a wonderful reminder of the fact that everyone we meet may well, in fact, have some mum or some dad or some grandma somewhere praying for them. And
Yeah.
so the people that we cross paths with, bump into, they are persons that God cares passionately about, and is looking to you and me to be a little part of the link in the chain of
Isn't it
him.
amazing?
Yeah, it is remarkable.
And I guess we won't know till we get to heaven. And these people come up and say, "You were the guy who was kind to me. You were the guy who stopped when I was homeless and said, you know what? Here's a cup of coffee. And look, I'm not going to preach at you, but I'm a Christian, and I hope you don't mind. What's your name? As I go on my way now, is it okay if I pray for you?" You were the guy who did that. You were the girl who was in the office, and when everybody else was bitching, you'd always be really kind about other people.
Mm.
And I noticed on your desk you had a Bible. You never really talked much about it, but I thought, wow, that person was, you're the guy, you're the girl. I'm the girl. No, I'm the guy.
Oh, Kieran, so good, so encouraging, and so
What joy to speak with you, Jez.
just down to earth as well. Thank you so much for your time
No,
today.
thank you.
Um,
No, thank you.
it's been
I'll stop you there.
it's been very rich, and I'm sure will be a huge help to many. So God bless you.
Thank you, Jez.